classroom?
All right. I just have to admit that I am a little bit stressed because I'm speaking right after Anya, and Anya is like a top expert. So, the bar is so high. I hope I'll manage to deliver. I'll do my best. But Anya, you did not make it easy for me. So, yeah, you keep challenging me as a speaker
You'll
also,
be
which is
most
good.
definitely fantastic as you always are.
Thank you. I love a good challenge, so it should be all right. Thank you.
Okay,
All right, so maybe in the meantime, I will just try
yeah,
to set up my presentation and share the
okay,
screen while we still
okay,
are
okay.
getting the answers. Okay.
Bye bye, Anya. So I am ending the poll. Thank you, everybody who took part in it. And Gosha, the audience is all yours. I'm happy to have you today at our spring conference.
All right, I'm super happy as well. And hello, everyone. Some of you, I'm sure, with some of you I've met before, but probably not with all of you. So my name is Gosha, and I am speaking to you from Hamburg, Germany, where we finally have a good weather. So I'm also very energetic after like 3 months of, constant rain. Finally, there is some sun. It does not happen often. So I hope you're already warmed up after Anya's presentation. You're feeling fine. And just one quick question: can you see my presentation well? You should see one slide saying the game is on. Yeah. All right. Excellent. Okay, so let me begin. And throughout the presentation, I am going to be asking some questions. So please do not be shy to type your answers in the chat window. We will interact a little bit, and you're very welcome to share your thoughts, share your comments, your feedback, whatever comes to your mind. If you have some ideas, also do share them so we can exchange our ideas with other teachers. So the game is on. And let's talk about how to navigate young learners' progress with gamified digital tools. And I always like to start with a story because I draw from my personal experience as a teacher, but also as a child who was taught in the past quite a lot. And I like to observe also myself as a student. I keep learning things, now I'm learning German. I'm not very successful at it, but I'm doing my best. So let me tell you a story. And yeah, when I was a child, it was, I think, in the early 90s when we got our first computer. My dad got a computer. He needed it for work. And it was this old IBM, like a big monitor, very loud. When you turn it, you switch it on, and then you have to wait for 20 minutes for it to turn on, old technology. But everyone at home was excited. Now, since I was really young, I think I must have been like maybe 6, 7 years old. I was not that interested in the computer itself, but I was really, really interested in the keyboard, the physical object, because it made clicking sounds and, I could type on it. I must have been younger, I must have been like 5 years old. I couldn't really write well. I didn't know the alphabet yet, so maybe I was even younger. But one of the games that I played all the time was the game of what I would call now associations. So I would look at the letters, I would click on them on the keyboard, and I would, for example, click on the letter H and say, oh, it looks like a ladder. So I would make those associations between the shapes of letters and the objects that I actually was familiar with and the objects that I knew. So that was the very first computer game that I played. It was not really a computer game, but it was a game that used a computer, as specifically a keyboard. It didn't even have to be plugged in. But of course, as time passed, I started to discover more possibilities that the computer gave me. And I got one of my first games, and it was called Ortotris. Now, Ortotris was a game, as you can see, the graphics, like this is pretty much what it looked like, but just to remind you, it was a long, long time ago. So it was a game which was pretty much like Tetris. I don't know if you're familiar with the Tetris game, but you got those blocks and they fall and you have to sort of like adjust them. And if you don't, they pile up and at some point you lose, right? I see that you are familiar with that. So it was the same thing, but as you can see here, there were words falling down, and in each word, there was one gap. Now, Polish, which is my native language, is quite challenging when it comes to spelling because we have quite a lot of pairs of letters that would sound the same when you speak them, but they look different. So for example, for je, we have either Z with a dot or RZ, so the combination of letters. And there are some rules, but generally you have to learn it. Some of them you have to memorize. And if the words keep falling quite fast, and they do fall faster and faster, then you don't have much time to apply the rules. You just have to, memorize it. So it's quite a challenge, and quite a lot of students in Poland, they struggle with remembering, like, which jet to use or which for example. We have H and we also have CH. The same sound, there's no difference. You just have to know which to use when. So that was what the game was about. You just had to choose the correct letter. And I love the game. I spent, well, from my perspective now, I think I spent hours playing it. Now when I think about it, I don't think my parents would have allowed, me to spend hours playing this game. But from my perspective as a little child back then, that was a lot of time. And I absolutely love the game. Because first of all, it was simply fun. There were moving objects on the screen. Like, who doesn't like it, right? Especially back then, it was kind of like a new thing. Computers were a luxury. I was lucky to have a dad who actually worked in tech, so he did have the access to that. But it was not a common thing, as many of you probably know/remember. Now, I could also show off during tests at school. Because I knew how to spell very difficult words. And one of the most difficult words in Polish is grzegżółka. No one ever knows how to spell it. I am not even sure what grzegżółka is. I think it's a kind of bird, but correct me if I'm wrong. I have no idea, to be honest, which is maybe a bit embarrassing now because I don't know what it is, but I know how to spell it, right? And also, the thing that I loved about this game was that I could compete with my older brother. Now, I was, 5, 6 years old. No, with Ortotrix, I must have been like 6, 7. My brother is 4 years older. So when I was 7, he was 11. Now that's a big difference, right? If you think about the level of knowledge, right? But still in this game, we were equals, right? Because I played it so much and I have drilled the structure so many times that my brother, well, he was still a little bit better. But at some point, well, at least I remember it that way. I would have to ask my brother to confirm. But I felt that I was a little bit better at it because I just kept playing this game until I learned all the words. So this is why I liked it. But there was also another result of playing this game, which is getting very good grades in język polski, which is the subject in which we read, but we also learn how to spell and so on, right? So bardzo dobry in Polish is the second best grade. Celujący is the highest grade, but you hardly ever get it. It's practically impossible. But I was a very good student when it comes to the language. And I personally think all thanks to the game. And then again, as I grew older, the games became much more complex, and often they were not really accessible, not available in Polish. So we had English versions of those games. And the game that I loved playing was called Theme Hospital, in which you run a hospital. And I have recently learned that there is a new version of this game on, I think, PlayStation. You can play it, or maybe on a computer. I don't know, because I'm not a gamer, really. When it comes to those modern games, like simple games. But in this game, you build a hospital, and with the sound on, you keep hearing announcements from the reception desk. So again, I must have been like maybe 9 or 10, and I kept hearing a couple of times a day 2 surgeons required in operating theatre, for instance, or a doctor needed in GP's office. So I actually learned quite a lot of medical vocabulary. A lot of those things in the game were made up, but those are actually real. So also there was another game, which you can see on the left side, is Jack-O-Lantern. I know it's like a bit of a walk down memory lane now for me, but this is all to lead you to some theory behind games. So please stay with me, bear with me. It will make sense in a moment. So Jack-O-Lantern was another game that I loved. It was a detective game. So you're a detective and you're framed and you have to solve the mystery so you don't go to prison for something that you didn't do. So Jack-O-Lantern was also based on dialogues, or quite a lot of dialogues. And look at the level of them. Just an unfortunate coincidence again, my friends, right? An unfortunate coincidence, and that is advanced English, but it was no obstacle to me because I was so into the story in the game that I didn't care much, I didn't even think about the level of English. It was just something that I had to understand. So I would ask my dad, ask my brother for help, and I would, push through the game, which I finished, by the way. So this is pretty much what it looked like to me as a child, as a student. So at school, I would learn with books. Again, it was early 90s, right? So learning with books was fun as well. I liked books always, I still do. But school was for learning, home was for playing, right? And what I did not realize back then, that at home, I was also learning by playing games. I was just completely unaware of that because I was a child. But we teachers are aware of those processes because we're adults and we're professionals and we know better, right? So to me, they were completely different worlds. And I did not perceive playing as learning, not at all. Playing was pure fun for me, but it did teach me quite a lot of language and also other things. I also played games based on mathematics and stuff. But since then, because again, that was the early 90s, since then, quite a lot has changed. And we have learned a lot about how children acquire knowledge. And I think we also knew quite a lot back then, but, information was not easily accessible. It was not that easy to, find a book on methodology. Things were not, within the reach of our hand or a click of a mouse. So nowadays, we definitely know more about the value of games also in the classroom. And I'm sure that you play a lot of games with your students. So this is relatively new, I would say. I mean, we did play games in the past. I'm not saying we didn't, but we definitely know much more about it nowadays. And we also have many more options because our classrooms turned into digital classrooms. And even if they haven't, you can still access a lot of digital tools in your face-to-face classroom, right? So whether you teach online or you teach face-to-face, it does not matter. We have the access to the same tools that you can always display on the screen, or maybe you have an interactive whiteboard and so on, right? So we have the access to tools that can help us create games, graphics. Even now with AI, you can quickly, write a short prompt and create a story character based on the description of your students, right? So, and everything happens within minutes. So it's quite amazing. So we got prepared to the whole process of incorporating games as something that is coded here. Can you guess the word? I think you probably know the word already, but maybe someone can type it in the chat window. What does this word stand for? Yes, gamification. Yeah, that was too easy for you, but do not worry, I will challenge you further. So let's talk a little bit more about gamification and what gamification is. So this is what I want to start with. I would like to establish the meaning of the term, okay? So we just make sure that we're on the same page and that we are talking about the same thing. So with a little help of people who are wiser than me, let's have a look, let's establish the term. Gamification in education, because this is what we're talking about, is this approach in which you increase learners' motivation and engagement by incorporating game design elements, right? So in other words, you take all the best things about games and you put them into your classroom, right? You apply them directly. And when we think about those, good things about games, which we can also call game design elements, comes to your mind? Because I have a couple of ideas, but first, maybe you can write yours. When you think about the games that maybe you played in the past, or maybe you play in your classroom, they might also be analog games. They don't have to be digital games, right? We will focus on digital, but a game is a game, right? So if you think about what we get in games that we also then use in our classroom, all right? There's a lot of you here today, which is great. I'm not sure how fast I will see your answers in the chat window, but I do see some already. All right, so we have tasks, for example. Yes, we have a lot of small quests or tasks, and we move on, go further and further, and we do the same in our classroom, don't we? Right. Okay, we have instructions. This is something that I am not going to be talking about, but it is very true and it is very important, right? But we also have competition, challenge, rewards, absolutely, all of those things. And some of those things that you are right, teamwork, yeah, collaboration, right? So some of the things that you have just mentioned, I also have thought about. I thought about discovery, right? A lot of games are based on this principle of discovering, a new world, maybe discovering also the rules sometimes because they get more and more complex, right? As we proceed. There's definitely a lot of collaboration. There are also some games that do not require collaboration, but not every game would have all of those elements, right? So sometimes there's just 2 or 3 of them, and those are also just some game design elements that I think are important. There's definitely the challenge, and a lot of you also have mentioned that in the chat window. Progress. In a game, you can see your progress, right? And in our classroom, sometimes we also use different tools to show, also diagnostic tools like tests, right? To check the progress of our students, but also to show them their progress. Like, look, you're getting better and better, right? Of course, we have rewards, and in the game, it's finishing the game, but we also have different kinds of rewards like stickers or maybe badges or sometimes candies, right? Although I'm not a big fan of this, but sometimes once in a while, maybe not a bad idea. In the digital world, you can also have those digital badges, right, or medals that you can give your students. So if we look at the theory again, it makes complete sense that gamification has been adopted to support learning in a variety of contexts and subject areas. So again, we take what's best from the games and we use them because it works for games, it works for teaching as well. So we would we would design the activities to foster collaboration, also self-guided study, right? So when we give instructions and the students have to figure out on their own, we have assignments that we complete. Some of you wrote tasks, and this is pretty much the same thing. For us, assessments might be much easier and more effective, right? Because we can turn assessment into fun, which I think a lot of us do, right? So we build positive connotations also, and we integrate exploratory approaches to learning. And I will talk about those things a little bit more later as I show you some specific examples of exercises that I do in my classroom. And of course, with both games and teaching, we strengthen students' creativity and retention, right? So we revise quite a lot, but we do it in more and more creative ways. Sometimes our students have to be creative to, complete the task and so on and so forth. And again, if you look at the game that I told you about at the very beginning, or Tetris, it naturally had those elements because after all, it is a game, right? Or it was. I don't think you can play it anymore. But remember that it had a great educational value to me, and I bet my arm also to all the people who played it without us even realizing, because in reality, what I thought was playing a game, in reality, it was mostly learning spelling, right? Which I'm still good at, by the way. So if you think about all those processes, they're everywhere, right? Maybe you have a smartwatch that counts your steps, and maybe my smartwatch, what it does is like if I walk a certain number of steps, it gives me a badge, like you have climbed the Eiffel Tower, for example, and then you have, walked across, South America, for instance, right? So to translate my achievements into something fun, right? But also all the apps that we have for shopping, for example, buy 3 products, collect points, and then this is your reward for being a loyal customer. And then with those points, you can buy something with a 10% discount. So this is your reward. This principle, isn't it? Gamification is absolutely everywhere. That's why we, love our smartphones and we love our apps. Now, let's have a closer look at what those games bring to our classrooms a little bit more specifically. So games would guide players through the mastery process and keep them engaged with tasks that are potentially difficult. And if you think about it, guidance and high level of engagement are key elements in a language classroom, aren't they? Right? Because, well, you have to guide your students through the whole process of learning, but also you want to keep them engaged. So, so you sort of like facilitate the whole process, right? Because if they're not engaged, if you lose them, right, it's going to be very difficult to teach them anything and for them to learn anything, right? So, for instance, we guide them through tasks like, let's say we introduce some vocabulary that they will need to understand the text. So instead of just giving them the text, we guide them through the whole process, right? But also, one critical game design is that the challenges, they have to be tailored to the player's skill level. And as our students get better, the level of difficulty increases, right? So think about, for instance, flashcard games. When you introduce new vocabulary, you start with something very, very simple because the students are not familiar with it. And then as they get better, and, maybe 2 lessons later, you want to play another flashcard game, you probably, add a twist to it, right? So you can make it a bit more challenging because their skill level has already increased, right? At the beginning, they didn't know the words. Now they know the words. Or maybe at the beginning, they didn't understand the words. Now they understand them. Now you want them to use them, right? So you, again, increase the level of difficulty. I'm going to show you how to do it in a moment. And one thing which is really important is specific, moderately difficult, but immediate goals, because this is what motivates the learners. So also for accomplishing those little immediate goals, we often get rewards, right? And again, as I said, with analog games, it may be like a high five, right? I loved high fives as rewards. I think they're very, very effective. But in digital games, most of the time, you get a, for example, pop-up with a badge, right? Or you get like a pop-up with a cute picture and like, oh, you're great, right? Affirmation. So, so setting those immediate goals makes much more sense, especially to our students who do not think about like, what's my English level going to be in 5 years. We're not there. Like even adults, we do not think about it that much, right? It's like what's here and now. So I have a task I completed, yay. All right. So since we're talking about gamified digital tools, I would like to introduce those three. Now, I'm sure that you are familiar with either all of them or at least some of them. So for this session, I have chosen those three tools, but they can be replaced with pretty much any other tool that you prefer. Now, the thing about those tools is that a lot of them are for free, and I only today talk about the functionality which is not paid, right? Everything I talk about is for free, but more and more tools actually have certain limits that they didn't used to have. And, they had, for example, different kinds of quizzes, available for free, but now there's only 2 kinds instead of 5 and so on. But maybe some of you have the paid versions. Maybe some of your schools actually pay for the premium plan, right? So I encourage you to explore it. But something that is extremely important to me and something that I want to stress before I show you some specific exercises is that I know that the internet offers loads of great fun tools, right? A lot of them have also like those, trial versions for free and so on and so forth. But I think that this is a trap. Actually, not long ago, when I was preparing this session, I was updating it. I probably set up like at least 20, different accounts on different websites to test out different tools. And I spent so much time on it. And I think this is a trap because we've got a little bit too much of a good thing. And so we might end up actually falling into this trap of, trying to use more and more spectacular tools and spending too much time on that. And I do value your free time and my free time. And I do want to prepare professional lessons, but I do not want to do it at the expense of my well-being, because as teachers, you definitely have to take care of that too. So rather than focusing on those tools and all their properties and what they can do, we're going to look at how Kahoot or those other tools, which is like Miro, which is pretty much interactive whiteboard, and also quizzes, we're going to look at how they add value to our lessons. Okay, so I don't want to flood you with possibilities. I want to show you simple things and how to make them valuable. So then you can really choose 3 or 4 functions and you can play them on and on. And I wouldn't be worried that my students might get bored, because think about the games you played when you were a child, or maybe you also have children and you can observe them. Sometimes they will play one game forever, right? For, I don't know, the whole day they'll play one game, they never get bored, right? So, so this is what I want to stress. I will not show you 20,000 tools. I will only choose 3, only show you 3 with a very, very limited functionality, which is free of charge, but we'll focus on why we use them and when to use them, and why using them in a certain way, in a certain moment, can be beneficial, okay? So, yeah, in other words, all you need is less, because I do believe that less is more, especially when it comes to teaching. I think that we should really focus on what we've got and not overwhelm our students, because it's a trap. And I've been there. I've experienced that, and I took a massive step back and rethought the whole process. So here's some lesson stages, right, of things happening in our lessons that we are going to have a look at. So it's going to be introducing new vocabulary, because this is what we do with young learners all the time. Also, pre-teaching vocabulary for reading, which I think is extremely, extremely important. And it might be slightly different to introducing new vocabulary, because the vocabulary we pre-teach for reading is not necessarily our target vocab, right? So let's say if you work with certain books, for one unit, you probably have, well, depending on the level, but you would have like 8 to maybe 14 words or short phrases, right? And if we pre-teach vocabulary for teaching, it's mostly to make it easy for our students to understand the text. We are also going to talk about reading itself, because this, as we know, can be a challenge with, students' short attention span. And we will have a look at grammar. Finally, revision. So let's start with introducing new vocabulary. And why is it a good idea to use a gamified tool here? Now, here's what comes to my mind, because, on lower levels, we start with introducing the vocabulary. It's extremely important, because those are, I'm going to use Anya's metaphor. Actually, Anya, I saw that was showing some blocks. This is what vocabulary is at the very, very beginning of each unit, and also at the very beginning of, the learning process and the whole educational process, right? So we take those little bricks, the words, and then we put them into short phrases, like, for example, it's a cat. And then we can build on that. We can make dialogue. Look, it's a cat. Wow. And this is, and look, it's a dog, right? So you can make short dialogues and so on. And because most of the time we have to deal with mixed ability classes, and I have already talked a lot in my sessions about mixed ability classes, so maybe some of you have attended them and you remember, some students that you teach will already be familiar with some of the words, while other students, not really, right? So that's the first challenge, and that's why gamified tools might come in handy. Also, students sometimes, most of the time, would need a different amount of time or repetition to master a certain set of vocabulary. So sometimes you've got those students who, okay, let's say all the words are new to them, but they just learn them so fast, right? They have good memory, maybe they have aptitude for, learning and languages, whilst some other students, they really need a little bit more support. And the trick here is that, you don't want the, let's say, faster working students to get bored, but you also want your students who need a bit more time to get enough support from you. And here is, a good moment to introduce some games. Of course, the last point, building positive connotations will result in better engagement, right? So if you have your students associate learning a new thing with fun, it's going to be easy for you. It's also going to be easy for them. And this applies to absolutely everything, right? So, so I see that some of you write that you prefer that your students learn words playing games. And this is what we usually do, right? Because if you think about how you introduce new vocabulary, let's say this is a sample set of vocabulary, so places around town, we've got building, flat garden, and so on and so forth. How do you normally start? Assuming that your students do not know those words, or maybe know some of them. Maybe they know the word park, because maybe it's similar, to their native language, but they're not familiar with, for example, flat. That's a new word. So what would you do? How would you start? Because I've got a couple of ideas, but I first want to hear yours. Or read in the chat window. All right, I'm pretty sure that you do it all the time. Yeah, showing pictures, exactly. So that's what I thought about flashcards. We like to start with flashcards. Sometimes maybe in a book you have a big picture and you have a recording in which the words are listed and the children point to those words, right? So at first it's very, very passive. It's understanding the words before they start to produce them, right? So I see flashcards are the winner here. And for a reason, because they're absolutely amazing. It's, the very basic tool. Okay, I also see Quizlet, and Quizlet also is flashcards, right? So Quizlet is the app that allows you, that lets you build sets of flashcards. So yeah, just digitalized, right? Absolutely. All right, flashcards, guessing games. Yeah, you can also try that also with flashcards. Another thing that I thought about that I have not seen anyone mentioning, but maybe I don't see all of your answers, but songs, right? Sometimes you have a song in which you have those words, or a chant, right? Chants are even maybe, I don't say better, but some people prefer them at the beginning, right? Because it's very rhythmical, it's easy to repeat, and so on. And also drilling words, right? So repeating songs and rhymes, exactly. There's also a lot of drilling there, right? So this is what we usually do. And I think that this is exactly the moment in which using a digital quiz, so Kahoot, comes in handy. And because again, so you start with introducing the vocabulary. You play some games. First, you focus on the passive skills, so understanding the vocabulary by hearing and pointing to the picture. Then you move on to something more active, so maybe the children repeat. And then you have Kahoot, in which you can also write the words, so your students can also see them. And here, the challenge is that on Kahoot, you have the timer, right? And the clock ticks, and the clock is ticking, and there's only a limited amount of time to answer the question. And also, this fosters collaborations. The students can work in groups. They can also work individually, but it's kind of like, magic happening. I click something on my phone and I can see it on the screen. So it definitely keeps them engaged, right? So it's something which is a little bit different in a way that it's digital, right? But so this is the simplest thing. And I think it makes a lot of sense just to give the slower working students an opportunity to practice a little bit more in a fun way. And the students who have already mastered the words, they are going to stay engaged, right? They're not going to get bored because they are playing a game. But something that I like to do is add a little twist to that. Okay, so I might start with this version. But Kahoot, even though the only functionality it offers in the free version, in the basic plan, is either quizzes like that or true false. So it's very, very limited, but there's still quite a lot you can do with it. So what I like to do is take it to, a higher level. And in the previous version, as you saw, it was the simplest version. So you had the picture and you had to choose the word. Also, you can do it the other way around. So you have the word and you have to choose a picture, right? So the focus was on words. Now, in this case, the focus is not so much on words as a whole, but on the spelling. And I think this is especially important for you and your students because very early they have to master 2 alphabets, right? Which is an insane challenge. And I think we have to remember about that. So you might have noticed that the letter missing in this word, which is street, as you see. So the letter R, it is quite similar to the letter K. Also, with some fonts, the way the letter K is written, it looks kind of like R, So in some some fonts you can see it. Also, I think the letter H is somehow similar because it's also like 2 lines. It's kind of like the same size. So I try to choose the letters that are somewhat similar. But if you think this is not enough, you can challenge your students even more. And this is what I really like doing, maybe not necessarily in the first lesson, but as a revision, for instance. But also, if I see that my students have already mastered the words, they can repeat them, they can point to the pictures, they can name them, but they still struggle with spelling. So, I just jumble the letters and they have to find the set of letters that contains, from which they can create the word. And notice how I kept the initial letters correct here, but this, of course, is up to you. I usually keep the first letter correct because it's a little bit easier. And I think this task is quite challenging, especially if you have some longer words, right? This is also the task in which I like group work, right? So 1 device per group of a pair or a group of 3, because this is quite a challenge. And I think the students might need a little bit more support. After that, I would ask my students to spell it, right? No such thing as too much spelling. So you can also stage those games. So you can choose one, the first, the second, or the third version, or you can stage it. So you start with the flashcards, then you play the simple game to add some energy and to keep the faster working students engaged. Then you might want to move on to the song and then challenge them a little bit more, you know, with those letters that are similar. And then when you've already practiced spelling, you can move on to writing practice, right? In which, for example, in activity books, very often students have to write the word, right? Sometimes it's tracing, sometimes they just have to write it. And then you can move on to the final practice, the final challenge. And why do I think this game is effective? Well, one critical game design technique, you have seen it before, I'm repeating it now, is to deliver concrete challenges that are tailored to the player's skill level, increasing the difficulty as the skill expands, right? So one simple quiz used in 3 different ways gives you the opportunity and the possibility to adjust it to the skill level of your students. So if you have stronger groups, don't start with the first quiz, start with the jumbled letters or with the gaps, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that I really, really encourage you to think about this one functionality of Kahoot only and think about what else you could do with it. Because you could also use it to, for example, I don't know, challenge your students to put the words from the lesson in the alphabetical order, for instance, right? And so on, so forth. So, yeah. Right? I think we can move on, but there's one more thing that I want you to remember, and actually do remember it throughout the session because I will be getting back to this one a lot. In the best designed games, the reward for solving a problem is a harder problem. And I couldn't agree more. If you think about the games we play, right? Let's say it's a video game. I'm not much of a gamer again. I don't play video games much, but my partner does, and I like to watch him playing sometimes because I just like to observe, and the stories are interesting. I just don't want to hold the pad, and I don't want to do this. That's too difficult for me. But it makes a lot of sense. The reward doesn't always have to be a good grade. The reward can be, all right, look, you're here, so now you can finally do, you know, the super challenging task. Let's see if you can do it, right? I think you're ready. Kind of like you have a game with a warrior and also like you think you're ready to climb this mountain now, right? So training preparation to achieve something better, right? To go further in the game. All right. So we talked about vocabulary. We are going to stay with vocabulary, but this time focus on pre-teaching vocabulary for reading. And why is it a good idea to use a gamified tool here? Well, sometimes a longer text, and by the longer text, I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be very long, but remember, you know, our students, to them, even 3 2-sentence paragraphs might be a longer text, right? But let's think about with older children. So I'm talking, let's say, grade 3, maybe grade 2, 3, 4. So not the first grade, but a little bit further. Sometimes a longer text may be richer in new vocabulary, which, as I said at the very beginning, might not necessarily be your target language. And a game can help students learn those words relatively fast, the words that they need to understand the text and perform further, like, you know, reading comprehension tasks, right? So I like to use games. I love to use games to pre-teach vocabulary because, again, I don't want to spend too much time on that. And it's not the most important thing to me that my students know those words very well. It's enough for me. They know them enough to understand. So they don't necessarily have to do the spelling, right? This is not that important. It's great if they do, but this is just a tool they need, or like a function, right? Like in a game, or skill in a game, they need to perform the task. And also reading is a rather slow-paced activity, and a quick game can also help you boost the energy level beforehand, right? So we start reading, we pre-teach vocabulary by game, and we start reading on high energy. And the tool I'm going to be using here is Miro. Now, is anyone here familiar with Miro? Because Miro is a free workspace collaboration tool. So it's used in a lot of startups, corporations, and so on. And I actually chose it because I also use it in other fields of work, and I'm just really familiar with it, and it suits my needs. It's got everything I need. But yeah, oh, okay, you use it, excellent. Because I don't think it's that popular at schools, but I think it should be because it's just great. But instead of Miro, bear in mind they can use any other tool, which is something like an interactive whiteboard, IWB. right? So maybe you have IWB software at school installed on the school computer, or maybe you have those, you know, boards, maybe you have it on your computer. Maybe you can think like there are also other tools. Another tool that I know is FigJam, for example. Sometimes there are also those free whiteboards. I like Miro because you can save it, you can download it. And I also like it because the canvas is pretty much endless. So I have everything in one place. I can easily you know, copy everything. And yeah, it's just my favorite tool. That, again, we're talking about the functionality of it. So whatever tool, whichever tool that has a similar functionality, the same functionality you choose, is going to work, because the tasks are going to be extremely simple, right? Remember, less is more. So I chose a text. It's a text about a family on a boat, and they, you know, at some point, they get to this island where there are little people who are not very welcoming, but then, you know, there's the explosion of a volcano, and the family takes the little people from the village on the boat, and they save them, and everyone is happy, and we are good friends. So just, you know, so you know what we're talking about. And here's what I do first. I use Miro. So in Miro, like in any other software like that, you can create simple shapes. You can also do it in PowerPoint, but in Miro, they will be interactive. So I create those tiles with the words that I want to pre-teach. So I look at the text, I just, you know, replace the words with those tiles. Now, with some software, you can simply highlight those words, and you can also do it in Miro. I like to prepare those tiles because then what you can do is you can just copy all of them, and you already have a set of word cards. So you don't have to do it twice. So, you know, I like to do things once and then recycle them a lot. So that's what I do. And the next thing I do is I place the pictures representing those words around the text. And in some, like in Miro, sometimes I just, you know, find the pictures on the internet. I just take some free resources and I, you know, make a screenshot, copy paste the pictures. In some tools, you can also use Google image search to paste the picture. So on Miro, you can do it with Google image search. Some tools, they have certain limits if you use Google picture search, but some of them don't. So, you know, just think about what works for you. To me, copy pasting is usually the easiest thing to do. Just making sure that I use free resources. And I present around the text. And then I have my students work either individually or in pairs or in small groups, and they use arrows to connect the pictures with the words in the text. Now on Miro, you can easily just mark everything and duplicate it. So you have this huge canvas, and you can have, you know, the same task for different groups. They don't see each other's tasks. So is very easy in this tool. But again, you can also just have your students join through their own devices. That's what we do. So we match the pictures with the text, and to gamify it a little bit more, you can also set the timer if you wish. Now, then I go through the answers, and I quickly change the color of the arrows. Green if it's correct, red if it isn't. So for instance, there is this one word, it's very small, so you probably can't see it, but the one with the megaphone, the phrase is a loud noise, right? So I see my students connected it correctly. So I say, okay, yes, that stands for a loud noise. Let's make a loud noise. And then the students shout. Or for example, angry is one word, right? So we connect it. And if it's correct, you know, their reward is the, you know, miming the word. So angry, right? But the volcano was a tricky one here. They did not connect it well. So we have to try again, because if they don't try again, and if they don't find the correct word, they cannot pretend to be a volcano exploding in the lava, right? So they definitely want to do it. So, you know, so yeah. And this is something that I did a lot with young learners. So pictures and text, because again, I don't necessarily want to focus on spelling. I don't think it's necessary for the text if it's not my target vocabulary. I don't want to overload my students, and I don't want to overwhelm them. Now, why is the game effective in my opinion? Well, we have specific, moderately difficult, immediate goals that are very motivating for learners. Again, this is something you have seen before. I'm repeating now. So, sorry, in this game, the specific goal is to get familiar with the words to understand the text, right? So the immediate goal is not understanding the text. The immediate goal is to get a set of skills to understand the text later. It's very specific. it's moderately difficult, right? Because they have quite a lot of support. They have the visuals, they can see the pictures. And their motivation is that then they will be able to read the text. And before a task like that, I would, of course, try to like make or like create the atmosphere of mystery around the text, saying, oh, I've got a great story for you, so I want them to be interested in the text. And I want this task to keep them motivated to be able to find out what happened in the story. But we also talked about this, that the thing that I asked you to remember, that in best design games, the reward for solving the problem is a harder problem. So here's what you can do. On Miro, because it's very often used in corporations, you have a lot of tools like grids and a lot of templates. Like, for example, the set of flashcards they're used for brainstorming in the in offices. So that's what I did. I took this grid with flashcards, sorry, not flashcards, with Post-its, right? As you can see, I changed the colors of the first Post-its so I can assign them to different groups. I quickly copy pasted the pictures, and now the students have to arrange those pictures in the order they appeared in the story. And the reason I want them to do that is because then, after we have read the story, I would like them to recreate the story by looking at the pictures only, right? And if you think about it, in the previous task, we have mimed a lot of those things. So they already have the associations. We went one after another, right? So there were a lot of senses involved. So it should be a little bit easier here, but it will be a challenge here. I think it's a big challenge. That's why I have them work in groups. So as you can see, the first group, I don't know if you remember, you don't remember the order of the pictures because you didn't have a chance to read the whole text, but they made a couple of mistakes, so but then they can have a look at what other groups did and recreate the story. So yeah, remember, like the reward for a task is a more difficult task. This is something that I always remember about, no matter, the age of the students and the level of the classroom. This is something that I really want the students to learn. All right. Now, let's move on to reading. And I don't know how your students normally respond to reading tasks. I mean, not respond to reading tasks themselves, but, when they have to read something, especially if you also teach teenagers. Because my experience, especially with teenagers, is like, oh, no, reading again, right? It's difficult, it's long, and so on. Of course, it's not always like that. But to me, it is extremely important to build positive connotations with reading from the very beginning, right? Because reading is fantastic. It's the best thing humans invented, in my opinion, right? You might disagree, but to me, it's our greatest invention, I believe. So let's have a look at how to use gamified tools to make reading a little bit easier. All right. So again, this is something that I've said before when we talked about pre-teaching vocabulary for reading, and I am going to repeat that reading is a slow-paced activity. So because it's slow-paced, I think a quick game can really boost the energy level beforehand or during reading. Right? So I see that some of you wrote that students don't like reading. This is going to change, and I'm going to show you how it may change, right? Now, also, with certain tools, you also, when you have a longer read, you get a chance to change this basic text, and by basic, I mean pure text, into an escape room-like adventure. You can stage it, right? You can prepare it in a way that one step unlocks the next chunk, because every text, if you think about it, is divided into paragraphs, right? So this is where digital games, get the spotlight. And this really helps students stay on the task because the task itself might be quite long, and you want to make sure that the students have enough time to work on each paragraph, especially those who maybe read a little bit slower, right? So keep them engaged. And this time, I will use the third tool, the one that I haven't talked about before, and it's quizzes. Now, quizzes has a lot of functionality very similar to Kahoot or Quizlet, but there is also one thing which is a free feature that I really want to show you because it's great. So one function that I especially like about quizzes is that it allows you to prepare quizzes. Not quizzes, the name, but quizzes as in plural from quiz, right? I wonder where the name comes from, right? But you can also prepare the whole lesson on slides. So you get slides, and the slide can be either a fragment of a presentation, it can be a picture, it can be the text, it can also be a quiz question, all right? So I'm going to show you a sample lesson, reading lesson that is prepared with quizzes. Now, what I chose is preparing pizza, the text about, preparing a pizza and the recipe. And I think it's a good text, but I also see, like, if you look at it, there's quite a lot going on here. So there's a picture, there's a reading tip. You have different fragments like ingredients, instructions, equipment, some more pictures, preparation time, and then the text. So I think, first of all, it's quite a lot, right? It's quite flashy also. So I want to sort of like organize it a bit. Secondly, I think it's perfect for staging because the text itself has stages, just like when you cook the pizza. So in quizzes, I prepared a lesson on slides, and I start with some introduction, the best pizza recipe. Are you ready to make the best pizza in the world? The students go, yay, right? And off we go. And next, I want my students to get emotionally involved, right? Because the more positive emotions they have, they experience while reading, the better for me and for them. So I asked about their personal preference, right? So they have to vote. My favorite pizza is, and we have tomato pizza, salami pizza, mushroom pizza. I don't like pizza. No one ever chooses it, but and of course, there are only 3 options. You can choose different options. You can make more than 4 options. Sometimes students say like, oh, but I love tuna pizza. Great, we have more speaking. Excellent, that's what we want. And then you can see the results of how the class voted. So we can see which pizza is the most popular, right? And then we move on. And this is one of my all-time favorite functionalities in this tool. And hopefully I'll also show you what you can do with it in a moment. It's called Word Cloud. And there are different tools who have it. There are also separate tools for word clouds. There was something called Word Garden or Answer Garden, something like that. I don't know if it exists still, but Quizzes has it. So your students, there's an open question, and your students type their answers on their phones, and this is where you will see the answers. They will be displayed here. So you can also see some spelling mistakes, which is not your focus here, but you can just make notes for later to work on it and to address it. And you can discuss it. If a lot of students give the same answer, this answer will be bigger. The word will be bigger, right? So if a lot of a lot of students write, for example, onion or onions, then the word will be bigger, right? So yeah. And then we move on to the next task. Now look what happens here. We haven't read the text yet, but we already know so much. We already discovered so much vocabulary that the children will come across, right? And they already are very familiar with the context of the text without having seen it, right? Then we move on to the vocabulary quiz, right? So as you have seen, the equipment is part of the reading task. There are some pictures here, but there's also one more word in the text, the oven, which is not listed, but I want to add it here. I want to pre-teach this word, so I do it sort of like by the way, because with this tool it's super easy. You can have more answers. So I do a simple quiz here, which I can then reuse in different stages of the lesson. And then I'm going through each step of the recipe. So if you can have a look at the text, there are 6 steps of the recipe, right? So what I do is I transfer it into the app. Now, because they're very short, I just type them in. And they go as follows. First, chop the and. And the students have to decide which things here can be chopped. So they also pay attention to the verbs. We also do some grammar, so win-win, right? And we continue. So next, heat the in a right? So they have already gone through the list of ingredients. They have already gone through the list of equipment. So here they have to think about how to use those words, right? Excellent. And then we move on to the last step. So I go through all paragraphs and I move on to the last step, which is how long do you cook the pizza? Students can vote. So here, I like to do it as a poll. So there are no good or bad answers. We just vote and then we see how long, and we see if the majority of the class was right. Now, only here do I let my students open their books and look at the text, right? Okay, let's look at the text. Let's see if you're right or if you're wrong. Let's have a look at it. They're already very enthusiastic. they can focus on the text because they do not get distracted by the list of ingredients and the equipment because they already know it. So they focus on the recipe itself. And I think this game is really effective because games generally evoke a range of powerful emotions, right? From curiosity to frustration to joy. And they can provide many positive emotional experience, but also some negative experiences. So for instance, if you don't get the answer right, you might get frustrated. I am sure, I bet my arm that you had the situation in the classroom when a student did something wrong and they maybe started to cry, right? Because this emotionally can be very difficult for them to handle. But if we do it through the game, and if we do it in pairs, and if, what we're doing here, it's fun, it's not that important because your task is to read the text. So don't worry if you do it, if you make a mistake, don't worry about it. This can be good, because now it was a mistake, negative experience. So then you will be better, positive experience, right? From frustration or sadness to excitement and the sense of achievement. That's what we do with a game, right? So I personally think it's extremely important. And that makes the game extremely effective. And of course, you can do it with different texts. But there's one more thing I want to show you. Remember, in the best designed games, the reward for solving a problem is a harder problem. So another thing that you can do is you can put the text here. Now, using interactive whiteboard, I have not done it, but let me just quickly show you. You can also cover parts of the text, right? So then you can just go bit by bit, right? Some of them are covered, some of them are uncovered. You can do it with, interactive whiteboard or Miro. And then you add questions and you make them more and more difficult, kind of like with a flashcard game, right? So the first question is a multiple choice question, right? So it's the easiest one. Then we have fill the blank. Who likes to dance, right? And you have to write one word. Then you have open-ended questions. So what does Pat like? And then you have to write a little bit more. So again, you solve the easy problem, you get a more difficult question and you get more text, right? So that's how we move on. And it's time to move on very quickly to practicing grammar. So why is it a good idea to use gamified tools with grammar? And well, first, if you think about how our students learn to communicate, they would learn by using very, very short phrases, such as, for example, it's a cat or I can swim. But at some point, the sentences get longer and we enter this very, very tricky area of showing them the patterns of grammar. And I think, like, personally, to me, this is very difficult because I don't want to lead to the situation in which my students will start thinking in rules. That's not my aim. I want them to use the language spontaneously. But I also know that it's good for them to understand the rules so they can build more sentences and they have more options. So this is also what Anya was showing you, right, with the bricks with which you can play. So I think showing the sort of like mechanics of structures throughout, by using games makes it easier for the students to understand, but also makes them less attached to the rules, right? It just allows them to be creative with the sentences without thinking that there are certain rules, but also at the same time applying those rules, which in turn enhances creativity and retention. So let me show you how. Right. And again, we are going to use Miro. Okay. So the interactive whiteboard, because you can prepare a very simple task with it and you can reuse it multiple times and you're going to love it if you haven't done it yet. All right. So this is my grammar focus going to for future plans. Quite a challenging topic because there's a lot going on here. You have, auxiliary verbs here. So, and you also have next week, tomorrow. So you see, you have quite a lot of grammar going on here. And this is what I do with it. In Miro, I just assign a different color to a different part of the sentence, right? So, so the subject will be yellow, then the positive auxiliary green, the negative red, going to is black, then the verb with its collocation is blue, and then the time is purple. And I don't know if you're familiar with this game. It's called Mastermind, and it's a very simple code breaking game. So this is exactly what I do. right? So I got inspired by this game, and the activity is super, super simple. I simply code the sentences and I ask my students to break the code. And they have to look at the table and they have to decide how to make a sentence, right? Now, their sentences will be different, right? They can be very flexible with them because maybe it's I am going to go swimming tomorrow, or maybe it's he isn't going to go surfing on Tuesday. I don't know. But I absolutely love this exercise because you can make very long sets with it. You can give it a try if you want. I wonder if you can decode the sentence. We don't have much time, but maybe I can get at least one answer in the chat window. All right, should be finishing in a moment, but I think it's worth a try. All right, so let's quickly have a look at it. Can you decode it? Right, be careful. Look what color is at the very beginning. Can we get a sentence? Let's get creative here, people. All right, let's see if you can write it. I don't know if I will have a chance to read your answers now, but I promise after the session, I will look at all the things you wrote in the chat window. I promise to do that. I think there's a bit of a delay when you write, so I'm just going to move on, but I believe that you have written some answers and you have given me some ideas. Now, this is something that is, again, extremely important, right? So we integrate the exploratory approach in learning. So rather than just telling children, this is how you do it, we code something new and they observe that, oh, the word from the back also go to the end. Now, look, we haven't discussed questions here, but we can also make a question. I'm talking about this one tile, right? In which I made a mistake, actually. I'm terribly sorry. So it should be, oh, no, it's correct. So we have, am I going to play football next week, right? Or is he going to go surfing? Oh, yes, now I can see your ideas. Fantastic, right? So my students, I let them explore on their own. I let them play. I would say, okay, put the dots in whatever order we want. Let's see if it works. And then I tell them if it does or doesn't work. We can also then have a look at some texts that we have done before, and maybe we can find the same pattern in a text. And here I highlighted the patterns that they have seen before. But look, there's also something new going on here. There's the word what, which we haven't seen before. So let's add a new color to it. Let's play further. I think you see my point. You get my point. You see where I'm going with this. This can be also extremely, extremely useful when it comes to past tenses, right? So each category of words has a different color. And then you can show how, for example, I like it with past simple because we have two forms of verbs in the same tense. It can be either the past form or it can also be the present form, the infinitive with didn't or did in questions, right? So you can blend those together, like in the last line, I didn't go to the cinema. I went to the restaurant, right? So you have the same verb, but different forms, and here it's clearly visible. All right, now, unfortunately, we're running out of time. It's never enough time. I think we could talk about games forever, but the time has come to sum it up. Now, one thing I did not mention is the revision, but I will just quickly, briefly mention it. So what do I do with games and revision? What do you think? I generally take the games that I have already played and I play them again. And I think this is something that gamification and gamified tools make very easy for us. You play the game once and then you can play it multiple times. So I do want you to remember about it. And I really do want you to remember that less is more. And then that using games can help guide your students throughout the mastery process, which is the whole learning process. That it can help you, keep them motivated long term, but also short term. And that you can simply have fun and they have fun building positive connotations, but also it's, enables you to, it makes it easier for you to introduce competition on a very healthy level without anyone feeling bad about it. The theory of the language, like grammar, for instance, you can teach in a very attractive way. And finally, no student is left behind. Those students who work faster, they have fun, so they don't get bored. Those students who are a little bit slower, they get enough time to revise everything. So yeah, it's a win-win. And that's it from me. But if anyone wants to try, if you go to menti.com and you type in this code, you will have a chance to try the word cloud. So I'm going to finish and give the stage to Ina, but I'm going to keep sharing my screen, Ina, if it's not a problem. And I will show you what happens. There are only 50 places there, so you have to do it fast if you want to try it. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. And yeah, and have a lovely rest of the day. And please, okay, we get new responses. So look what happens. Look what happens. Wait, am I showing my screen? All right, look what happens as you type in the words. So thank you very much and have a lovely rest of the day. And of course, Slava Ukraini.
Geroyam Slava, thank you, Gosha, very much. Your ideas are as useful as and practical as usual. And lots of them are easy to use and ready-made and take to the lesson almost tomorrow. But now we have a spring break, so it's not gonna happen tomorrow, but in a few days.
Oh, but it's a good moment to try out those tools, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I hope you see the chat with lots of thanks and smileys and emojis and flowers. You deserve it fully. I just want to thank all the participants and remind you that you will receive the certificate within 3 days' time. I would like to remind you that you will receive the recording of our today's first day of conference. And one more reminder that tomorrow we have day 2. It will be Teenagers Day. So if you work with teenagers as well, we will see each other tomorrow. Stay safe and thank you very much for participation, for joining us today. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you very much. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for your answers in the Menti. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.